There are places in Pittsburgh where you cannot escape the name Heinz. It is on the concert hall, on a chapel at the university. For 20 years, it was on the football stadium. The name is everywhere. But the family that built it spent a century watching everything they owned slip through their fingers, until almost nothing was left. This is what happened to the Heinz empire. It began with one man, and one stubborn idea that had been installed in him long before there was any money to protect. His name was Senator John Heinz, born in 1844, the son of a Bavarian bricklayer who settled in Sharpsburg, Pennsylvania. His mother ran the household on a single conviction: anything worth having was built through steady work, and cutting corners was not efficiency. It was dishonesty in disguise. The boy absorbed it whole. By 8, he was selling vegetables from her garden. By 12, he was farming 3/4 of an acre and delivering by wheelbarrow before school. By 16, he employed 3 young women and kept the books himself. In 1869, he went into business for himself, and his first product was the one that would nearly destroy him: horseradish. What mattered was the container. Back then, shoppers distrusted horseradish. Makers cut it with turnip and wood shavings and sold it in brown crocks that hid what was inside, by design. Heinz put his in clear glass. Look at it. In a market built on hiding the product, transparency was radical, and it worked. Grocers noticed. Orders grew. Within a few years, he had 150 workers and barrels of pickles, sauerkraut, and vinegar by the tens of thousands. He was 31, and certain the hardest part was behind him. Then the ground gave way. The panic of 1873 worked through the economy, and in 1875, a collapse in horseradish prices wiped him out overnight. $110,000 in assets against $160 in debt. His parents' furniture was seized. He was arrested twice, tried for fraud before the charges were dropped. His partner walked away from the company and the friendship both. For a man raised the way he was, bankruptcy was not just a financial failure. In the Lutheran world he lived by, it was a moral one. And the shame was proportional. That is the weight behind what he did next, the thing that became the founding myth of the entire dynasty. Pennsylvania law would have erased his debts completely. He refused. He wrote every creditor into a notebook labeled moral obligations. Every name, every figure to the dollar, and spent years paying off debts a court had already forgiven. Barred from running his own company, he rebuilt it in his relatives' names. His wife Sarah put in her savings and held half the shares. Together the family scraped up $3,000, and Henry worked inside his own company as an employee. In 1876, he introduced Heinz tomato ketchup. From there, the climb was steep, and it did not stop. Sales passed 1.25 million by 1889. When the company incorporated in 1905, it carried not a single dollar of debt. The 57 varieties came from a shoe store sign he saw from an elevated train. He already had more than 60 products, but 57 sounded precise in a way a round number never could. He lobbied Congress himself for the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, while his competitors paid lawyers to kill it. His factory gave workers medical care, hot showers, even weekly manicures, decades before anyone required it. By the time he died in 1919, the name meant one specific thing. What was on the label was what was in the bottle. He divided his estate among 3 children. 2 stayed in Pittsburgh and carried the company forward. The 3rd went west, and that is where the first crack opens. Clifford Stanton Heinz moved to California in the years after his father's death. 3 marriages, long hotel stays, a slow drift away from his own children, the family called it eccentricity. By early 1935, he was dying of pneumonia in a hotel room in Palm Springs. His 3 children were a few hours away in Beverly Hills. They were not told he was dying, and by the time they understood, he was gone. When the will was read, they learned why. Their father had disinherited all 3 of them completely. His daughter, Nancy Heinz Russell, later testified that the disinheritance had been arranged on the deathbed under pressure from the Pittsburgh branch. That the Eastern family had decided the Western family did not count. The lawsuit that followed ran for roughly 50 years and ended in exhaustion rather than vindication. Partial settlements, after decades of legal fees, had eaten most of what was at stake. It is a small story against the size of the company, and that is exactly why it matters here. At the very moment the dynasty was consolidating its wealth and its civic image, it was quietly deciding that one branch of its own family was not entitled to either. The climb and the first crack were happening at the same time, in the same family, funded by the same fortune. And it left a mark that outlasted the money. Some of Clifford's grandchildren grew up in California in the 1960s with no idea a Pittsburgh branch existed at all. People who shared their surname, controlled foundations, and a concert hall, and a company doing hundreds of millions a year, and whom they would never meet. What they inherited instead was the particular experience of giving their name and watching the pause that followed, the reference to ketchup, the assumption of wealth and access, none of which applied to them. Nancy Heinz Russell said the bitterness was never really about the money. It was about the deathbed, and about being told, in effect, that her family did not exist. Back in Pittsburgh, the company reached heights the founder never saw. The bridge between the founder and the peak was his son Howard, who took over in 1919 and ran the company through the Depression. A careful steward rather than an empire builder, who introduced Heinz baby food and ready-to-serve soup suited to households with no margin for waste, and helped found one of the country's earliest coordinated charities. When Howard died in 1941, control passed to his son, Henry John "Jack" Heinz II, groomed for institutional leadership from childhood. Under Jack, who ran the company for 25 years, the numbers climbed past anything the family had seen. Revenues grew from roughly $100 million a year to more than $500 million. Operations spread across 5 continents. The Wigan factory in England, opened in 1959, became one of the largest food plants in Europe, and Heinz baked beans became, improbably, a British national food. A loyalty the British extend to very few imported things. Jack owned around 12 homes and moved through circles that included British royalty and Greek shipping magnates. His name went on the Pittsburgh Symphony's concert hall. He helped organize the urban renewal effort that remade the city's image from smoke, blackened relic, to something modern enough for a postcard. The family's philanthropy, foundations, endowments, a memorial chapel on the University of Pittsburgh campus, turned the name from a brand into something that felt like heritage. Not just prosperity, but permanence, the assurance that the dynasty had always been there and intended to stay. Underneath that peak sits the second crack, and almost nothing survives of it. In 1940, a woman named Marie Jennings died in Pittsburgh, in circumstances connected to Roust Heinz, a grandson of the founder. What the connection actually was has never been examined in any official family history. What survives is the resolution. The family paid roughly $25,000 to close the matter. About 15 years of a typical worker's wages at the time. No trial, no prison. Marie Jennings became a line item. Set that beside the founder's notebook, and you see how far the family had traveled in a single generation. Henry Heinz had cleared debts the law said he didn't owe, out of a conviction that obligation outlived the law. By 1940, his descendants were settling obligations the opposite way, by payment and by silence, with the minimum acknowledgement and no record of either the debt or its settlement. Pittsburgh was a company town. The machinery for making a problem quietly disappear was already in place. Marie Jennings appears on no Heinz building. The Heinz History Center, which presents itself as a full record of the region, does not mention her. Philanthropy at that scale works as a kind of editing. You build what you want remembered, and what you leave out is what you don't. The family's climb reached its most visible height not in business, but in public life, in a man who almost didn't feel like a Heinz at all. Henry John Heinz III grew up in San Francisco, not Pittsburgh. His parents divorced when he was 4. His father, Jack, was a distant figure of 12 homes and international obligations. In California, nobody paused at the name. A college roommate remembered him simply as Johnny Heinz, a young man with none of the trappings of a rich kid. Yale, Harvard Business School, the Air Force Reserve. He won a House seat in 1971 and the Senate in 1976. The first Republican ever to carry every ward in Pittsburgh. 3 terms followed. Colleagues who disagreed with him on everything said the same thing. He was one of the few who had actually read the bills he voted on. He worked across party lines on pensions and drug coverage for the elderly when neither paid off politically. He was, by every account, the present and engaged father his own father had never been. In the Senate, he sat on the Finance and Banking Committees and co-chaired a National Commission on Social Security Reform, doing the kind of unglamorous cross-aisle work that carried real cost in an increasingly partisan Washington. His colleagues described him with a consistency that is rare in politics. One called him not merely tireless, but joyfully so. Someone who genuinely believed he could make things better. Voters returned him 3 times by wide margins. He had married Teresa, born in Mozambique and fluent in 5 languages, and together they were raising 3 sons. By any measure, the family had reached its highest point, not in ketchup, but in a man who wore the name lightly and had turned it into something like public service. On April 4th, 1991, he was flying a short leg from Philadelphia toward Washington aboard a Beechcraft King Air. A question came up about whether the landing gear had deployed. A Bell 412 helicopter was asked to fly alongside and check the undercarriage. At 4:10 in the afternoon, over Lower Merion Township, the 2 aircraft collided at low altitude above Merion Elementary School. Both were destroyed. The senator, his aide, and both pilots were killed, along with 2 people on the ground when wreckage fell near the school. 6 dead on a clear spring afternoon. The NTSB investigation ran for months, and its finding is worth stating plainly, because the plainness is the point. The probable cause was the helicopter crew's failure to keep adequate separation during the gear check. And the landing gear it had been sent to inspect had been correctly deployed the entire time. The verification was unnecessary. 6 people died confirming something that needed no confirming, on a clear afternoon over an elementary school. Pennsylvania held a special election. A Democrat won the seat. And within months the office the Heinz name had held for 15 years was gone. The single thing that had lifted the dynasty into national life fell over a schoolyard and did not get up. After the senator's death, the fortune passed to his widow, Teresa, estimated at somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion. She ran the family foundation seriously for 3 decades. In 1995, married John Kerry, the Democratic senator from Massachusetts. When Kerry ran for president in 2004, the Heinz money. 3 generations of Republican Pittsburgh wealth became a national political target. Teresa was not a cautious Pittsburgh personality, advised toward restraint. She once told a reporter she believed was misquoting her to shove it, and generated more coverage than weeks of Kerry's policy speeches. Critics raised her 4 homes and her estimated billion-dollar fortune at exactly the moment the campaign was trying to win working-class voters in Ohio and Indiana. The portrait of a Massachusetts patrician married to a ketchup billionaire fit his opponent's characterization more cleanly than any research could have engineered. Bush carried Ohio by fewer than 119,000 votes, and with it the presidency. Fortune that 3 generations had converted into civic virtue was converted back into a liability in a single campaign. But the real fall was structural, and it had been coming since the company went public in 1946. Jack Heinz kept effective control through voting shares and believed the family still held the company. In truth, the threshold had already been crossed. Shareholders, who were not Heinz's owned pieces of it. Analysts published opinions on how it was run, and its value moved with market sentiment rather than family preference. The transition from private dynasty to public institution is irreversible, even when the family prefers not to notice. It took 5 decades to show what Jack's belief had actually been worth. The answer arrived on Valentine's Day, 2013. Berkshire Hathaway and 3G Capital bought the H.J. Heinz Company for $28 billion, the largest deal in food industry history, and took it private for the first time in 65 years. Warren Buffett's presence let the acquisition be framed as patient, long-term stewardship of an iconic brand. He called Heinz the best-managed large food company in either hemisphere. What 3G actually brought was a method, not a vision, zero-based budgeting, every cost justified from zero each year, an approach that had made its founder one of the richest men in Brazil by applying it to beer companies. Heinz was next. Layoffs, plant closures, and cost targets the old management had thought impractical followed within months. The Pittsburgh headquarters, which the city had long treated as a permanent civic neighbor rather than a corporate tenant, was stripped down with the efficiency of an organization that regarded sentiment as just another line item requiring justification. In 2015, Heinz merged with Kraft to create a company with roughly $28 billion in annual revenue and a portfolio that ran from ketchup to Oscar Mayer to Jell-O, the third largest food company in the country. It was announced as a platform for growth. In practice, it was a platform for running the same method across two big companies at once: strong short-term earnings, funded by cutting the investment that sustained the brands producing them. Marketing budgets contracted, research spending declined, underinvested brands lose shelf space, which cuts revenue, which forces more cuts. A cycle easy to describe and very hard to stop once quarterly targets have been built around the savings. In February of 2019, the whole thing came due at once. Kraft Heinz wrote down the value of its brands by $15.5 billion. A formal admission that the cost-cutting had destroyed the value it was meant to protect, and disclosed on the same day that the SEC had opened an investigation into its accounting. The stock fell more than 27% in a single session. Berkshire Hathaway's stake lost roughly $4 billion of value before trading closed. Warren Buffett, who had blessed the deal, called it a mistake, a word he almost never used in public about a major investment, and here he used it about the company bearing the name of the man who had repaid every creditor from an 1875 bankruptcy the law had already forgiven. The investigation closed in September of 2021 with a $62 million settlement. The company neither admitted nor denied the findings. Those findings alleged it had improperly reduced its reported costs by manipulating supplier contracts, inflating the earnings it showed shareholders. Put plainly, the numbers it had reported were not what they claimed to be. And there is the whole fall in one sentence. Henry Heinz built the company on a promise that the label and the contents were the same thing. The company that carried his name a century later paid tens of millions to settle allegations that its numbers did not match reality. The strange part is that none of it touched the ketchup. Through the disinheritance and the buried payment, the senator's death, the sale, the write-down, and the settlement, Heinz Ketchup held roughly 60% of the American market. Because people had always bought it, which is the kind of success that asks nothing of the people collecting the proceeds. The fortune outlasted everyone who built it. The bottle outlasted the fortune's meaning. Henry Heinz put his name on the label because he believed a name was a promise. His family kept the name for 150 years. What they could not keep was the thing that made it worth putting there: